Oh, wow.
Yeah. And we've got this fascinating YouTube video featuring Dr. Vandana Shiva.
I think what makes Dr. Shiva's work so interesting
Hmm.
is she doesn't just explain like the scientific concepts,
Right.
but she connects them to real world issues.
Yeah.
Things like food security,
Mm.
environmental sustainability.
It's like she bridges the gap between the really out there theoretical stuff
Yeah.
and our everyday lives.
Exactly. And in this video, she really challenges us to rethink like that old mechanistic view of the world.
Okay.
The one that sees nature as something separate from us,
Mm.
something we can just control and exploit. And she goes all the way back
Wow.
to figures like Bacon, who talked about declaring war on nature.
It's a pretty stark image when you think about it.
Yeah, it really highlights the attitude that Dr. Shiva is pushing back against.
Yeah, it makes you realize how deeply ingrained that mindset is
Absolutely.
of separation and control.
And that's where quantum theory comes in,
Correct.
turning that whole perspective on its head.
So how does it do that?
So Dr. Shiva breaks down these core principles like non-dualism, non-locality, indeterminism,
Right.
and wholeness.
Okay.
It's like she's showing us a totally different reality,
Yeah.
one where everything's interconnected,
Mhm.
constantly changing.
So could you give us an example?
Sure. Think about Dr. Shiva's work with seed banks.
Okay.
Instead of just relying on a few engineered crops like the Green Revolution promoted,
Okay.
which was this massive effort to increase food production through like high-yield varieties and chemical fertilizers,
Mm.
she champions biodiversity.
Okay.
She's saying, let's let nature's intelligence guide food production.
So instead of thinking about ourselves as like the master mechanics
Yeah.
in charge of the whole workshop,
Exactly.
we're sort of stepping back a little bit.
And this shift had a profound impact on Dr. Shiva's own journey. It led her from theoretical physics to activism around seed-saving biodiversity and sustainable agriculture.
Wow.
She realized that these quantum principles weren't just abstract ideas.
Yeah.
They held the key to understanding our relationship with nature
Right.
and finding solutions to the ecological crises we face.
So what are some takeaways that we can apply to our own lives?
Well, one of the most powerful insights is this idea of participation,
Okay.
recognizing that we're not separate from nature, but deeply embedded in it.
Mm-hmm.
Our actions have consequences, but they also have the potential to create positive change.
So how is that different from, let's say, using technology to fix environmental problems?
It's a completely different perspective.
Okay.
That technological fix often comes from that same old mindset
Mm-hmm.
that we can just engineer our way out of problems.
Right.
Dr. Shiva argues for a more holistic approach,
Okay.
one that recognizes the intelligence and self-regulating mechanisms of nature itself.
So working with nature rather than trying to control it.
Exactly. And it brings us to another crucial point that Dr. Shiva raises,
Okay.
the hard problem of consciousness.
Oh, yeah.
This is a big one.
Yeah, it's puzzled philosophers and scientists for centuries.
Right. How do feelings and awareness arise from physical matter?
Yeah.
It's a tough one.
And does Dr. Shiva have some insight into that?
She does. She argues that this separation of the observer and the observed, it's actually a construct of our thinking.
Okay.
Quantum theory shows us that they're fundamentally intertwined, even at the subatomic level.
So consciousness isn't just in the brain.
Right. It's more fundamental,
Okay.
woven into the fabric of reality.
That's a really interesting idea.
It is. And she even raises the question of whether focusing solely on the brain might be limiting our understanding of consciousness.
Okay.
She points to research about the role of the gut
Kagat.
and even the soil in relation to
Mhm.
consciousness.
Oh, wow.
It's a really radical idea that challenges our assumptions about where life and awareness reside.
It definitely makes me rethink some things.
Yeah.
But how does all this connect to the practical work Dr. Shiva does with food and agriculture?
Well, for Dr. Shiva, this isn't just about applying scientific principles.
Right.
It's about embodying them.
Okay.
This idea of interconnectedness isn't just a theory. It's a lived experience.
So her work with seeds and food systems is a way of putting these principles into action.
Precisely. And that's where her critique of GMOs comes in.
Okay.
Genetically modified organisms embody that mechanistic idea
Okay.
of isolating and manipulating genes
Right.
without considering the broader ecological context.
So she sees it as a continuation of that same mindset that
Yeah.
got us into trouble in the first place.
Right. For Dr. Shiva, it's not about rejecting technology.
Okay.
It's about using it wisely
Mm-hmm.
in a way that honors the intelligence of nature.
So more of a holistic approach.
Absolutely. And she sees seed saving and biodiversity as essential for food security,
Especially with climate change.
especially in the face of climate change.
So she's calling for an approach that recognizes the interconnectedness of everything.
Yeah.
From the soil to the seed to the farmer.
Exactly. And she's not just talking about large-scale farming.
Right.
She's also a champion for small-scale community-based agriculture.
Like her Gardens of Hope initiative.
Yes, like Gardens of Hope.
It makes me think about my own relationship with food.
Yeah.
You know, how often do I stop and think about where it came from?
Right.
The journey it took.
Exactly.
The interconnected web of life that made it possible.
That's the shift in perspective she's inviting us to make.
Yeah.
Moving beyond that sense of separation and
Yeah.
realizing that we're part of this intricate web of life.
It's pretty profound stuff.
It is.
So what else will we be exploring in our deep dive into Dr. Shiva's work?
We'll be delving deeper into her critique of the Green Revolution,
Okay.
her vision of Earth democracy, and her message about finding joy in our interconnectedness with nature.
That sounds great.
Yeah, it should be a fascinating discussion.
I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, me too.
So we've talked about this big shift in perspective that Dr. Shiva is calling for, but
Yeah.
what does that actually look like, in practice?
Yeah, that's where her work gets really interesting.
Okay.
She doesn't just talk about these ideas. She embodies them in her activism,
Okay.
like her critique of the Green Revolution.
Yeah. On the surface, it seemed like a great idea.
Right, higher yields, more food.
Exactly.
But Dr. Shiva asks, what were the long-term consequences?
Yeah, I know she talks a lot about the environmental impacts.
Yeah, things like soil depletion,
Right.
water contamination, loss of biodiversity.
But how does she tie that back to quantum thinking?
It's about seeing the bigger picture, recognizing those patterns and connections.
Okay.
She argues that the Green Revolution, with its focus on chemical fertilizers and monoculture farming,
Right.
actually disrupted the natural balance of ecosystems.
Okay.
Remember that concept of non-dualism? The idea that everything's interconnected? Well, the Green Revolution, she says, was rooted in that old separatist mindset.
But we try to impose our will on nature.
Exactly, and we're seeing the consequences.
Yeah, not just for the environment, but
Right.
for human health as well.
She even links the rise of chronic diseases to this disconnect from the natural world.
It's like our bodies are out of balance.
Exactly. We've disrupted that delicate balance within ourselves and the ecosystems we depend on.
And she even suggests there's a link between the health of the soil, the biodiversity of the gut microbiome,
Right.
and the rise of these chronic diseases.
It's all connected.
It all comes back to that interconnectedness.
Precisely. And this is where her work with seed saving and biodiversity becomes so important.
Okay.
It's about preserving that potential, that incredible web of life that sustains us.
In the video, she even gets into the science of photosynthesis,
Right.
reminding us that life itself is fundamentally an energetic process.
And she contrasts that with the artificial energy-intensive processes of industrial.
So we can't just engineer our way out of these problems.
We need to understand and work with the natural world.
Yeah, recognize that we're part of this much larger system.
Exactly.
So where do we even begin?
It can feel overwhelming, but Dr. Shiva offers some practical steps.
Okay.
She talks about reclaiming our seed sovereignty,
Okay.
moving away from dependence on those big corporations and genetically modified seeds,
Right.
and supporting local farmers who are working to restore biodiversity
Okay.
and build resilient food systems.
She also talks about reconnecting with nature.
Yeah, just spending time in nature, observing it, appreciating its beauty.
And she uses that term apartheid.
Right, to describe that sense of separateness.
Yeah, that illusion of being disconnected from the natural world,
And she contrasts that with concepts like Soam and Ubuntu.
which emphasize interconnectedness.
Exactly. Our well-being is linked to the well-being of the planet.
This brings us to her idea of Earth democracy.
It's a radical idea.
Yeah, but it's based on the understanding of interconnectedness.
It's not just about environmental protection,
Right, it's about social justice as well.
recognizing the rights of all beings to thrive.
So we're talking about a really big shift here.
It is a big shift.
But what about everyday choices?
Yeah. How do we apply these principles in our daily lives?
Right, the food we eat, the things we buy.
Dr. Shiva brings up this fascinating point from ancient Indian philosophy.
Okay.
The idea that everything is food,
Everything is food.
and everything is food for something else.
It's a cycle.
A cycle of life and death, transformation and renewal.
And she even talks about death.
Right. Not in a morbid way,
Okay.
but as a natural part of that cycle.
Yeah, a process of becoming food for other beings.
Exactly. It's a very different perspective from that Western fear of death.
Yeah, the desire to escape those natural cycles.
It's about accepting that we are part of those cycles.
Okay.
And she says the problem isn't eating itself. It's the thoughtlessness that often accompanies our consumption.
I love the story she tells about the Chitko movement in India, where women were protecting the forests from deforestation.
Right.
She describes witnessing a woman praying to the forest goddess,
Yeah.
apologizing for the harm she was about to inflict by taking resources.
It's a beautiful image.
It really is.
It captures that shift in perspective, recognizing the sacredness of nature,
Approaching it with humility.
taking only what we need.
It's so different from that extractive mindset.
It really is.
It makes you think about those concepts of limits and enoughness.
Which can feel radical in our consumer culture.
Right, we're constantly told to buy more, consume more.
But Dr. Shiva argues that real joy comes from participating in that interconnected web of life,
Yeah.
from experiencing that deep sense of belonging.
So it's not about material possessions.
It's about connection,
Okay. But what about the idea of mastery?
mastery.
Yeah, that we have to exert some control over nature, even in things like gardening.
She actually addresses that directly.
Okay.
Someone asked her about weeding.
Weeding.
Yeah, and whether it was compatible with quantum thinking.
Interesting.
They talked about feeling a sense of mastery over their lawn when they weeded.
Right.
And they wondered if that was okay.
And what does she say?
She said, it's not about the act itself,
No.
but the intention behind it.
Oh, so if we're weeding out of a sense of control,
Right, imposing our will on nature.
then it reflects that old mindset.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But if we approach gardening as a practice of participation,
Okay.
working with nature's intelligence,
Then it becomes an act of care.
exactly, tending to the balance and health of the ecosystem.
So it's not about never interfering,
Well, that-
but doing so with respect and understanding.
Exactly.
Even those pesky weeds have a role to play.
She connects this back to the idea of food systems.
Okay.
She argues that in the West, we've created these artificial systems that separate us from the source of our food.
We've become obsessed with controlling and sanitizing it.
Right, we've lost touch with those natural cycles.
And she believes that disconnect is at the root of many of our problems.
It contributes to both health and environmental issues.
So it's not just about the food itself.
It's about our whole relationship with it.
How we produce it, how we consume it, how we think about it.
Exactly. And this leads us back to that mind-blowing question she poses about consciousness.
Yeah, what if consciousness isn't just in the brain?
What if it's a property of the universe?
A fundamental force that permeates all living things.
She even suggests that the soil itself might have a kind of consciousness.
Okay, that's a lot to take in.
It is.
But how does this idea of a more expansive consciousness change our understanding of the world?
Well, it challenges that anthropocentric view.
Yeah, the idea that humans are the only intelligent beings.
Exactly. It opens up the possibility that intelligence might exist in forms we haven't even imagined.
It really makes you question your assumptions about life and consciousness.
It does.
So what are the implications of this view?
Well, it raises a lot of questions.
Does it mean we shouldn't eat anything, for example?
Dr. Shiva addresses that directly.
Yeah.
And she doesn't shy away from, the reality of eating as part of that cycle of life and death.
Right.
She points out that in a lot of indigenous cultures, there's this deep reverence for the plants and animals that provide sustenance.
Yeah.
So it's not about abstaining from eating.
Okay.
It's about approaching it with consciousness.
Yeah.
With
Yeah.
gratitude,
Right.
with respect for the life that's being given.
Recognizing that we're participating in this cycle.
Exactly. And she says this awareness should extend to all aspects of our consumption, not just food.
Okay.
It's about, questioning where things come from, how they're made, what impact our choices have on the planet.
Right. Recognizing that interconnectedness.
Exactly. That web of relationships that goes far beyond what we can immediately see.
Yeah. And she argues that when we lose sight of that,
When we lose sight of that interconnectedness,
that's when we run into problems.
we create problems for ourselves.
Or the environment,
Right.
or society as a whole.
It's like we're trying to build a house on sand.
Yeah, ignoring that everything's connected.
Right. And that our actions have these ripple effects.
So how do we rebuild that foundation, you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah. How do we reconnect with that sense of interconnectedness?
In a way that feels real.
She suggests a few key practices.
Okay.
One is spending time in nature,
Yeah, just being out in nature.
not just as a passive observer, but as an active participant.
Okay, how do we do that?
Engaging our senses,
Okay.
Noticing the details of the natural world,
Right.
cultivating that sense of wonder and appreciation.
Shifting our mindset.
Yeah, from what can I take to how can I be in relationship?
That's a big one.
It is. And another practice she emphasizes is gardening.
Oh, yeah.
She talks about it as a way to reconnect with the source of our food, to understand those cycles of growth and decay, and to experience that interconnectedness of all things.
It's about getting your hands dirty.
Literally getting your hands dirty.
Yeah, and realizing we're part of that web of life.
Exactly. And it's not just about growing food,
Right.
It's about cultivating a different way of being in the world.
Okay.
Slowing down, paying attention.
Appreciating those small miracles that happen every day.
And I love that she talks about finding joy in our relationship with nature.
Yeah, it's not about guilt or deprivation.
Right. It's about rediscovering that wonder and delight.
That they might have lost touch with.
It's about remembering we're part of something much bigger than ourselves.
Yeah.
Something that's been unfolding for billions of years.
It's a pretty humbling thought.
It is.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into Dr. Shiva's work,
Yeah.
what are some key takeaways for our listeners?
I think it starts with awareness. Paying attention to that interconnectedness that's all around us.
Noticing how our actions impact the world.
Exactly. Both near and far.
Questioning those assumptions that tell us we're separate.
That we're in control. That we need to dominate.
And embracing those quantum principles.
Non-dualism, non-locality, wholeness.
Not just as ideas, but as lived experiences.
Exactly.
Recognizing that we're not just observers.
We're participants.
We have a role to play.
Our choices matter.
And that joy is not a destination.
It's a way of being.
Finding delight in the simple things.
Appreciating that interconnectedness.
Yeah, participating in the creation of a better world.
A more just sustainable and beautiful world.
It's a beautiful vision.
It is.
One that feels both urgent and hopeful.
Yeah.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive.
It's been a pleasure.
We hope it's inspired you to look at the world with fresh eyes.
To see those possibilities.
To shift from separation to interconnectedness.
It's a journey worth taking.
Thanks for listening, everyone.